They say the mountains keep secrets better than any vault. But what they found frozen beneath 78 years of Alpine ice wasn't just a secret. It was a warning. And when they opened that door, they unleashed something historians thought had died with the Third Reich. Berlin, April 1945. The city is burning. Not metaphorically, literally burning. Every street is a graveyard of shattered stone and twisted steel. Soviet artillery pounds the capital like the fist of God himself. American bombers have turned entire neighborhoods into craters. The smell of cordite and death hangs so thick in the air, you can taste it on your tongue. Hitler is in his bunker, 30 feet beneath the chancellery, screaming orders at ghosts. The divisions he commands no longer exist. The armies on his maps are fiction. The 1,000-year Reich has 9 days left to live. Above ground, the wolves are fleeing. High-ranking SS officers vanish into the chaos like smoke. Some swallow cyanide capsules. Others burn their uniforms and melt into the refugee columns. A few, the smart ones, the prepared ones, simply disappear. Among them, Oberst Klaus Reinhardt. You've never heard his name. That was by design. Reinhardt wasn't a general. He wasn't a household face plastered on propaganda posters. He was something far more dangerous, invisible. While Goebbels gave speeches and Göring collected art, Reinhardt operated in the spaces between official records. His signature appeared on documents that were burned before the ink dried. His face never made it into photographs. But within the labyrinth of Nazi intelligence, Reinhardt was a legend. Fluent in 7 languages. Master cryptographer. Logistics strategist who could move men and materials across enemy lines without leaving a paper trail. He had been at Berchtesgaden, at Wolf's Lair, at every critical moment where decisions were made that the public would never see. In the final months of the war, Reinhardt's name appeared in a handful of intercepted communiques, always linked to something called Operation Eisschatten. Ice Shadow. Allied intelligence flagged it, questioned prisoners about it. Found nothing. The operation, if it even existed, was classified beyond classification. A ghost within a ghost. And then, on April 26, 1945, Klaus Reinhardt walked out of Berlin and was never seen again. No arrest, no trial, no body. Just a name on a departure manifest and a trail that went cold in the Bavarian Alps. For 78 years, that trail stayed cold. Until a Swedish hiker took a wrong turn on a ridge no one was supposed to climb. April 29, 1945, somewhere in the Bavarian Alps. The convoy rolls through the black forest under cover of darkness. 3 unmarked vehicles, no insignia, no flags, just silhouettes behind tinted glass. They're supposed to be heading toward the Austrian border, toward safety, toward surrender, maybe, or escape. But somewhere near the foothills, the convoy stops, and it never starts again. 2 days later, American forces sweep the area. They find one vehicle abandoned near a frozen lake. Doors open, engine cold as death. Inside, forged passports, Wehrmacht ration tins, and a blood-stained topographical map with a single location circled in red ink. Deep in the mountains, high above the tree line. No bodies, no witnesses, no explanation. The case file is stamped unresolved and buried in a filing cabinet in Munich. It sits there for 7 decades, gathering dust while the world rebuilds and moves on. But in the villages scattered across the Bavarian Alps, people whisper. They talk about lights in the high ridges, flickering at night like radio signals. They talk about footprints in the snow that lead nowhere, about a figure seen once or twice near the glacial passes, always alone, always watching. The children call him Der Geisteroffizier, the ghost officer. The adults tell them it's just stories. But even they lock their doors a little earlier when winter comes, because some part of them knows. The war didn't end in 1945. It just went underground. June 14, 2023. Bernese Alps, Switzerland. Eric Lindgren wasn't looking for history. He was looking for solitude. The 38-year-old software engineer from Stockholm had spent the last 3 days hiking through the Swiss Alps, chasing the kind of silence you can't find in a city. His route was off the main trails, threading through ridges and ravines that didn't show up on tourist maps. That's when he saw it. Just above a limestone outcrop, half buried in moss and mountain grass, was something that didn't belong. A stone chimney, blackened, cracked, rising barely a meter from the ground. At first, Eric thought it was an old shepherd's hut, but as he cleared away the debris, he realized it was something else entirely. Rusted metal sheets jutted from the earth like broken ribs. Beneath them, collapsed timber beams. And at the center, partially exposed, a reinforced trap door with iron brackets corroded by decades of frost. Eric's heart kicked hard against his ribs. He took photos, marked the GPS coordinates, and hiked down to the nearest ranger station. The rangers didn't believe him until they saw the pictures. Within 48 hours, the site was sealed. Swiss military historians, Alpine rescue engineers, forensic preservation teams, all flown in under strict confidentiality. What they found wasn't a shepherd's hut. It was a bunker. No, not a bunker. A tomb. And inside, something was waiting that had no business surviving the end of the war. The excavation. June 21, 2023. The structure was buried 6 feet beneath permafrost and compacted soil. It took engineers 4 days just to stabilize the entrance. The stone walls were reinforced with concrete and rebar, built not for temporary shelter, but for permanent occupation. When they finally opened the trapdoor, the air that rushed out was cold, stale, ancient. The chamber below was the size of a shipping container. Insulated walls, lined with rotting wool panels. A narrow staircase leading down into darkness. And at the bottom, a single room that had been sealed for nearly 80 years. Inside, a bolted table, a rusted kerosene lamp, a folded wool blanket on a wooden cot, and against the far wall, slumped upright in a chair, was a body. Mummified, frozen in place, dressed in the tattered remains of a Wehrmacht officer's uniform. On the table beside him, a leather journal, a Luger pistol with 1 round missing, and a single photograph of a woman, faded but intact. The forensic team moved carefully. Every object was catalogued, every surface photographed. But it was the wallet, tucked inside the officer's coat, that made the lead investigator's hands shake. Inside was a Nazi identification card. Name, Oberst Klaus Reinhardt. Rank, Colonel. Last known location, Berlin, April 1945. Status, missing. Until now. The room went silent. Not because they didn't know what to say, but because they knew exactly what this meant. The body, July 3rd, 2023. The remains were airlifted to Bern under armed escort. Temperature-controlled transport, 0 media access. The Swiss Federal Office of Police treated it like a bomb waiting to go off. And in a way, it was. Forensic pathologists worked around the clock. Tissue samples, bone marrow extraction, dental comparison. But the breakthrough came from a living connection. A woman in Heidelberg named Greta Reinhardt, 81 years old, had submitted her DNA to a genealogy database years earlier. She was the granddaughter of Klaus Reinhardt's younger brother. When her sample was matched against the mitochondrial DNA pulled from the frozen remains, the result was undeniable. 994% match. The man in the mountain was Klaus Reinhardt. But the autopsy raised more questions than it answered. No signs of trauma, No bullet wounds. No evidence of violence. Cause of death, likely hypothermia or cardiac arrest, estimated between 1946 and 1948. He had survived the war. He had built this place. And then he had died, alone, waiting for something that never came. But waiting for what? The answer was in the journal. And when they opened it, they realized the story was far from over. The journal. Entry 1. The leather-bound journal was cracked and brittle, its pages stained by condensation and time, but the handwriting was sharp, precise, almost mechanical. The first entry was dated April 28, 1945. Berlin has fallen. The order is given. Eichschatten is now active. Extraction successful. Proceeding to secondary location. Radio silence maintained. Awaiting Phase 2 confirmation. The word appeared again and again throughout the early entries. Eichschatten. Ice Shadow. It wasn't just a code name. It was a protocol. Reinhardt wrote in fragmented military shorthand, but the pattern was clear. He had been part of a coordinated withdrawal, not a panicked escape, a planned operation. May 2nd. Arrived at primary holdfast. Structure intact. Supplies sufficient for 18 months. Transmitter functional. Awaiting signal from Bergwacht. Bergwacht. Mountain Watch. The journal referenced other names, other code words. Nordheim, Falkenstein, Adlerhorst. Each one was followed by coordinates, some circled, others crossed out. And then, halfway through the journal, the tone changed. May 9th, 1945. Germany has surrendered. No signal received. Repeater silent. Eichschatten intact. Remaining in position. The war was over. But Reinhardt didn't leave. June 14th. Still no contact. Rations holding. Faith unbroken. They said silence would be long. I believe them. The entries grew shorter, more erratic. By late 1946, Reinhardt was writing only once a month. November 1946. Transmitter dead. No response on any frequency. I am alone, but I am not abandoned. The mission does not end with defeat. It ends with resurrection. And then, on February 11th, 1947, the final entry. 3 sentences, underlined twice. They are not coming, but that does not mean they are not out there. The ice remembers what the world forgets. After that, blank pages. Investigators found the rest of the cabin's contents methodically preserved. Tin rations, still sealed. A shortwave radio transmitter, modified for long-range encrypted broadcasts. A stack of forged identity papers. Swiss, Austrian, Italian. All with different names. All with Reinhardt's photograph. And beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth, a map. Not a standard military map. A network. Drawn in ink across the Central Alps were dozens of markings. Crosses, triangles, coordinates. Each one labeled with a code name. Eisberg, Schattenturm, Grauenstein. Investigators overlaid the map with modern topography. The markings matched real locations. Isolated ridges, abandoned mine shafts, high-altitude passes that hadn't been used since the war. One location, circled in red, was less than 50 kilometers from Reinhardt's cabin, and it hadn't been excavated yet. Operation Eichschatten. Declassified files. The discovery forced governments to act. Within days, archivists in Berlin, Vienna, and Bern were pulling files that hadn't been touched in 70 years. What they found was chilling. In 1946, British intelligence intercepted a fragment of a German transmission. It referenced something called Alpine Contingency Protocol. The report noted, evidence suggests a secondary network, possibly designated Eichschatten, intended to seed command cells in remote terrain. Assessment, Likely propaganda or misinformation. The file was dismissed, buried. But now, with Reinhardt's journal in hand, it was clear. Eichschotten was real. It wasn't an escape plan. It was a waiting plan. High-ranking officers, hand-picked for loyalty and skill, were embedded in the Alps. Each one given a location, supplies, a transmitter, and orders to wait. Wait for what? The journal never said explicitly, but the implications were clear. They believed the Reich would rise again, not through armies, not through war, but through patience. Let the world forget. Let the trials end. Let the survivors scatter. And then, when the moment was right, re-emerge. Reinhardt had been one node in that network. The map suggested there were at least 12 others. The second site. August 2023. Swiss authorities moved quietly. A small team was dispatched to the coordinates, circled on Reinhardt's map. High in the Austrian Alps, near a glacial pass rarely used even by experienced climbers. It took them 6 days to locate the site. Another reinforced structure, half collapsed, but still intact. Inside, another body. This one had died more recently. Estimated time of death, early 1950s. Beside him, another journal, another transmitter, another set of forged papers. His name was Hauptmann Ernst Vogel, and his journal told the same story. Waiting. Silence. Faith. And then, nothing. But Vogel's journal contained something Reinhardt's didn't. A list. 12 names. 12 code names. 12 locations. 3 of them were crossed out. 9 remained. The implications were staggering. If Reinhardt and Vogel had both died waiting, what happened to the others? Did they die too? Were they found and never reported? Or did some of them leave? The villages remember. Investigators fanned out across the Alpine regions, Austria, Switzerland, northern Italy. They interviewed the elderly. The ones who had been children during the war, the ones who remembered. What they found was a pattern. In village after village, the same stories surfaced. Lights on the ridges, strange men seen briefly in the markets, always alone, always silent. Shortwave pulses heard at night. One woman, now 91, remembered her father coming home in 1952, pale and shaken. He said he saw a man in the high country, dressed like a soldier. He asked my father for food. My father gave him bread. The man paid with a gold coin, Nazi gold. Her father never spoke of it again. Another man, a retired hunter, remembered finding a sealed crate in the mountains in 1958. Inside, medical supplies, ammunition, and ration tins stamped with Wehrmacht insignia. He reported it to local police. The police told him to forget about it. The crate was never logged. Slowly, carefully, historians began to piece together a terrifying possibility. Some of them survived. Not all. Maybe not even most. But enough. Enough to disappear into new identities. Enough to carry something forward. The network didn't collapse. It dispersed. Present day. The silence returns. The Swiss government sealed the investigation in late February. No more excavations. No more press conferences. Officially, the case was closed. Reinhardt and Vogel were confirmed dead. Their remains were catalogued and stored. But the other 9 names on the list? No comment. The Alpine sites were quietly monitored. Some were cordoned off. Others simply vanished from public records. Independent journalists who tried to investigate found their inquiries stonewalled. The official story became simple. 2 Nazi officers hid in the Alps after the war and died alone. Tragic. Resolved. But those who read Reinhardt's journal know the truth. He didn't die in despair. He died believing. And belief buried deep enough, can survive anything. Even 78 years of ice. Epilogue. Today, snow falls softly over the ridge where Klaus Reinhardt's cabin once stood. There's no marker, no plaque, no memorial. Just stone and silence. The tourists who hike nearby don't know what happened here. The locals don't speak of it. And the world has moved on. But sometimes, in the deep winter, when the wind howls through the peaks and the temperature drops below freezing, the old-timers in the valley towns will look up at the mountains, and they'll wonder, not if the war ended, but if it ever truly died. Because somewhere beneath the snow, in places no one has found yet, there might still be doors, still sealed, still waiting. And inside those doors, there might still be journals, still unopened, still believing. Klaus Reinhardt vanished in 1945. But the world he died for, maybe it's still out there. Frozen, patient, watching. And maybe that's the most terrifying discovery of all. Not what we found in the ice, but what we didn't find. The story you just heard was horrifying. But the story on your screen right now, even more disturbing.